Welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. Today I'm doing a book review of A Gallery for the Barbarian by Taylor Hartley. This is a 2003, February I believe, self-published fantasy novel. So I saw this book on Instagram quite a few times, and because the cover looked really fun, I followed the author until I saw that he had put the book on sale. So, as I always say so eloquently on this channel, I'd buy that for $1. I honestly went into this novel entirely blind, enraptured as I was by the cover. You know me and skeletons, right? Like, I love me an undead character. And I can quite honestly say that books like this are why I read and love self-published fiction. I adored this novel. I adored it. I can say without even reading the rest of them that this is probably my favorite book for July. Oh, and despite the length of this review, there are no spoilers. Now, why did I love this book so much? Well, gentle Herren and gentle Frau, this book is, you guessed it, absolutely wild. It's also mesmerizing, confounding, pensive, unique, and an aching tribute to art and love. What is this bad boy about? An untamed barbarian, his undead portraitist, and the city of magic and mirrors. Svinheim, glittering city of the fine arts. Fleshless painter Violetto scouts the streets for his next subject and finds unexpected inspiration in the beastly Brask of Bavaria. Hailing from the brutal north, with his immense appetites for gold and glory, Brask is sure to become a sensation to civilize Svinheim, by brush or by axe. As two shadowy and competing cults threaten to engulf the powers that be in the fine city, will Brask and Violetto achieve the fame and fortune they believe to be so rightfully theirs? How to start with this book. First, the style. It's first person. Yes, I know, rare for me. But it's a form of first person I actually love. The self-aware first person. The I'm writing to you, and I know I'm the writer. This is not first person narration. It's more found text. It feels like an epistolary novel, even though it's not one, really. And in that sense, it also feels like a gothic novel, because epistolary is a very common form of gothic novel. Honestly, it reminded me of Wilkie Collins and a bit of Dracula, in that Violetto's voice retains this classic literature sort of style, but mixed with, again, a sense that it's not trying to be a classic gothic novel, because it's not gothic at all. It's a fantasy that's like a grim fairy tale, given the German or perhaps Vienna-ness of the story, mainly due to the Germanic words like Herr and Frau and Schloss and Fora, and the almost German philosopher approach to some of the ideas. It reminded me heavily of Prosper's Demon, though not as dark. There is also a great deal of philosophizing in the novel, but in a way that felt natural to the story and not thrown in there. Also, it's hilarious at times. I laughed quite a bit. The writing style is like this, in case you're curious. There was no adventure without period and danger, without movement, without thrill and shock, and the flood of narration from one point to another in mutable space. So, if you don't like that kind of flowery prose, I don't know, maybe don't give this a shot, but I still think you should. The structure was brilliant. The novel is a collection of vignettes where most of the characters never reappear, where the stories, except for a few at the end, are entirely unrelated to one another, yet the story, as it were, is the growing relationship between Brask and Violetto, the deep love that is spoken by Violetto and shown by Brask's actions. Theirs is a marriage between brute force, the approach of kings and the king of approaches, and art, a mingling of confidence and the struggle for self-worth. Back to the structure, you have the vignettes, but you slowly realize, or maybe you're supposed to know from the start, that each one is like the backstory to a painting that Violetto has created of his muse, the Barbarian. It's a recounting of the adventures they had together, piece by piece. It's quite frankly brilliant in how it breaches the fourth wall in a way that makes you feel like you're living in the city, like you're in the gallery looking at the damn paintings, as it were. I have never read a novel like this in my life, at least one that was able to bring me in such a way that I kind of felt like I was experiencing what they were intending me to experience. If in fact that was the intention. I had two favorite chapters. The first being the Tower of Semiosis, which included this description, which is long, but I'll share with you because it gives you a sense of the oddness and surrealness and absurdity in a sense of the novel. There had gathered outside the tower gates a crowd of yellow-robed and yellow-accessorized individuals who seemed to take great issue with the tower. To their credit, the tower had appeared one day on Svinheim's western side to the more northern stretches of the river Medulla. It was far enough away from industry for people to wonder if the tower had always been there, and close enough to the Svinsgard thick streets that people maintained it had appeared on the skyline one morning as unassumingly as a thief in a jewelry shop. Perhaps you noticed it, reader, and thought more or thought nothing of it. Yeah, my kids put stickers on my tablet. Yeah. Anyway, so that's kind of another example of kind of the prose in the book. I loved that scene. My favorite chapter, though, was A Gallery for Barbarians with Livia, the sorceress. I loved her. There was a little quote about her. Her laughter produced a little butterfly of embers that flitted into the air before fizzling out into ash. Just like my laugh, right? I love the entire concept of that chapter, too. It was so much fun. Speaking of Livia, on to the characters. Brask, the barbarian, is hilarious. He's a typical barbarian through and through. He smashes stuff, he wants to drink and eat and have sex, and doesn't wear anything but his loincloth. But he's also eloquent and introspective and caring. He's the archetypal barbarian character in a way, but he's also critiquing the ideal of brute force equals stupidity or vapidness. In fact, his success at not giving in to the demands of society in any form is part of his barbarity and a part of him that's to be lauded. He does what we all want to do. Just say, fuck it, and do what we want. On to Violetto, our artist. I am utterly in love with him. Yes, he's a skeleton, but my heart breaks for my thin boy and his devotion to art and his best friend Muse' love of his afterlife. What's also wonderful about this novel is the lack of info dumping. There is almost no exposition in the story. We're expected to know how the city functions, what a post mortis is, and we're never actually explained, even though there is a chapter that kind of does. And we're not expected to be surprised, but of course we are, by the weird magical beings the characters encounter. For a character with literally no backstory because you can't remember it, Violetto carries so much depth. He's also that character type that I love in absurd stories, the one who recognizes bizarre stuff is happening when no one else comments on it and just kind of goes with it. It's also at times like he's the only one who sees the city for what it is. I almost wonder whether the city is a sort of afterlife itself, a sort of otherworldly zone where oddness converges, a liminal space, or perhaps limbo. It's, again, another fascinating element. It could also be completely taken at face value, and that's what I really love about this book. It gives you don't really know 100% what's going on, but not in a way that it's confusing or anything. It's just like it's kind of part of the fun. Speaking of that, the world building is amazing. The entire thing takes place in a city, and for a person who isn't fond of cities, I will say I was sad to leave this one. Violetto and Brass travel all over this insular landscape, from the slums to the outskirts, to the market, to the wealthy quarter, so much so that the city becomes its own character with its own personality. It's like Dahlgren in that way, or like Ambergris from Jeff Vandermeer's City of Saints and Madmen. There are these odd little things Brask and Violetto run into that you never see again, like a scientist doing a study on dragons, that didn't need to be included for the plot, but gave the city a richness and depth that I found so compelling. And despite it being set in what is clearly a Western fantasy world, there was a considerable lack of sexism and misogyny. There are dozens of female characters from all walks of life, and there are quite a few queer characters as well. Our titular Barbarian is bisexual, and Violetto is clearly gay, because no one says the stuff that he does about their friends. These things are never explicitly stated, though, because they don't need to be. I love when fantasy authors realize you don't need sexism, homophobia, and racism to make it feel like an older world. Take note, other authors. There are a few things that I have to critique, of course. The first was a preference on my part. The phonetic speech of one character in one chapter drove me absolutely bonkers. I hate phonetic speech. I understand why people use it in their books, but the problem is I find it hard to read. I don't want to decipher words when I'm reading. It's frustrating, and I'm never quite sure what the accent's supposed to sound like. Anyway, I have a whole thing about phonetic writing. I also wasn't as keen on the last chapter, which was a play. In truth, it felt a bit tacked on. The ending of the chapter previous was so strong and compelling. It felt like a climax that, this part should have been an addendum or something. Unless it was trying to show the story goes on. I'm also just not fond of reading plays, to be honest, Like, oh, what a plebe. I much prefer an epic poem or, prose. But honestly, these are minor critiques. This has been one of my favorite books this year. I'm definitely going to buy a print copy at some point. My eyes are watering not because of this book, but because I have severe allergies. For anyone else who reads and enjoys this novel, I will share with you a quote from the book that proves that we are kindred spirits. There is no kinship quite like that shared by two souls aflame with the same taste in art. Yeah. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope you check this book out.